Think about how many birds you've seen in your lifetime, flocks crossing the sky at dusk, a robin pulling worms from your lawn, sparrows fighting over crumbs outside a cafe. Birds are everywhere, and they have been your entire life. Now think about how many dead ones you've seen. Not a bird that flew into a window, not one your cat dragged in, a bird just lying there. In the grass, under a tree, on the sidewalk, gone, probably not many, maybe none at all. That silence is the mystery because birds are dying constantly, every single day, in extraordinary numbers. Disease takes them. Predators take them. Winter takes them. Studies estimate that for certain songbird species, half of all individuals born in a given year won't survive to see the next one. For every bird cheerfully eating from your feeder this morning, statistically speaking, a sibling from the same nest last spring is already gone. So where did it go? Where do any of them go? That question turns out to be one of the most frequently raised in the field of ornithology, and the answer is far more specific and far stranger than most people ever expect. What you're about to learn will permanently change the way you experience the outdoors. That familiar feeling, the vague nagging sense that something is missing whenever you walk through a park or your own backyard, is about to make a lot more sense. Today, we're going deep on one of nature's most overlooked puzzles, why you almost never encounter a dead bird, what actually happens in a bird's final hours, and where the bodies ultimately end up. And stay with us through to the end, because the last thing we cover involves behavior that scientists have only recently begun to document. Behavior that raises a genuinely uncomfortable question about what certain bird species may actually understand about death. Let's start with the numbers, because without them, it's impossible to appreciate just how large this mystery really is. Mind Body Part 1, Dying Birds Seek Concealment. At any given moment, North America is home to approximately 7.5 billion land birds. According to a landmark 2019 study published in the journal Science, annual mortality among adult songbirds runs between 40 and 60% depending on species. Run those numbers and you arrive at something staggering. Somewhere between 3 and 4.5 billion birds dying on this continent every single year. If even a small fraction of those bodies stayed visible for more than a few hours, dead birds would be a routine part of your day. You'd see them on your morning walk, you'd mow around them, you'd step over them on the way to your car, but you don't. The gap between how many birds are dying and how many bodies you actually encounter is so vast it almost feels deliberate. It isn't deliberate, but it isn't accidental either. The first piece of the explanation is behavioral, and it starts before the bird is even dead. When a bird becomes sick, injured, or physically compromised by age or disease, something shifts in how it moves through the world. Research tracking avian behavior during terminal illness, across studies involving everything from West Nile virus to avian influenza, shows a consistent pattern. Sick birds go quiet, slow down, and, above all, they hide. A healthy bird lives in open or semi-open space. It needs sight lines, it needs room to react. The moment a bird loses confidence in its ability to flee, when flying feels unreliable or reaction time has slowed, it stops operating in open space and retreats into cover. Dense shrubs, thick undergrowth, tall grass, the tangled base of a hedge, the interior of a bush so overgrown you've never thought to look inside it. This isn't a calculated decision. The bird isn't reasoning through its options. It's instinct, the same threat-response instinct that's kept birds alive for millions of years. When you can't outrun a predator, you hide from one. And the places a bird chooses to hide in its final hours happen to be exactly the places where, if it dies, the body will never be found. You walk past those shrubs every day. You don't look into them. Nobody does. But if you did, if you parted the branches at the base of every overgrown bush in your neighborhood, you would find things. The birds aren't disappearing. They're dying exactly where you'd never think to look. Main Body Part 2. Scavenger efficiency, but concealment only explains part of it. Because some birds do die in the open, on driveways, on lawns, on bare sidewalks, and those bodies vanish too. This is where scavenger ecology comes in, and the speed of it is almost hard to believe. Research into urban and suburban bird mortality has found that the average time a small bird carcass stays visible in an area with active scavenger populations is somewhere between 30 minutes and 4 hours. Half an hour, that's the window. Miss it, and there's nothing to see. Add to that the fact that many sick birds die overnight. Nighttime is when a compromised metabolism finally can't maintain body temperature, and you begin to understand why you wake up to an empty yard every morning. The body may have been there. You just weren't awake when it was. Now, when most people imagine scavengers, they picture something dramatic, vultures banking in slow circles, or a coyote trotting across a field. But the scavengers doing most of this work are far smaller and far more familiar. In warm weather, insects arrive at a carcass within minutes of death. Ants, beetles, and flies begin breaking down soft tissue almost immediately. Under the right conditions, a small bird can be reduced to bones and feathers within hours, not days. Hours through insect activity alone. But the fastest, most complete removal comes from animals most people would never label as scavengers. Domestic cats are extraordinarily efficient. A study in the journal Nature Communications estimated that free-ranging domestic cats in the United States kill between 1.3 and 4 billion birds annually. But cats don't only kill living birds. A dead or dying bird on the ground is a meal that requires no effort, and cats patrol their territories constantly, often between midnight and dawn when no one is watching. A bird dies on your lawn at 3 a.m., a cat finds it by 3:30. By the time your alarm goes off, there's no sign anything happened. Raccoons, opossums, skunks, and foxes, all of them common in suburban environments and increasingly common in cities, are opportunistic scavengers. Freshness is not a requirement. They'll take a carcass at any stage. Crows and ravens, whose intelligence and territorial awareness are well documented, scan constantly for food opportunities and will remove a dead bird quickly. Blue jays, though thought of primarily as seed eaters, are omnivorous and will scavenge. Even squirrels, animals most people associate exclusively with acorns, will consume bird carcasses for protein, particularly in winter when other food sources are scarce. The cumulative efficiency of these overlapping scavenger networks is so high that researchers studying bird mortality in the field often have to check locations multiple times throughout the day just to document deaths before the evidence is erased. 30 minutes, that's all it takes. Main body part 3, predation leaves no trace. There's a third layer to this, and it's the most unsettling of the three. Many birds never leave a body at all because they are consumed before one can form. Predation is among the leading causes of death in wild birds, and by its nature, it doesn't produce a carcass in any location you're likely to walk past. A sharp-shinned hawk intercepts a chickadee in mid-flight. There is no impact point on the ground. The hawk carries the bird to a perch somewhere in the canopy, eats, and eventually drops whatever it can't digest, small bones, feathers, onto the forest floor below. Not on a path, not on a lawn. In the trees where it decomposes unseen. A Cooper's hawk drops into your yard and takes a mourning dove at the feeder. What you see, if you're watching at all, is an explosion of feathers. By the time you step outside, the hawk is 3 properties away. The feathers scatter within an hour, blown by wind, or gathered by other birds as nesting material. The evidence of an entire death dissolves in the time it takes you to finish your coffee. Owls are even more invisible in this process. A great horned owl or screech owl hunting at night takes a roosting bird in complete darkness silently, with no warning and no aftermath that you would recognize. The owl consumes its prey whole or in large sections and regurgitates a compact pellet of indigestible material, bones, feathers, fur, hours later, often far from where the kill occurred. That pellet, sitting under a tree somewhere, is the only physical record that anything happened. And unless you know exactly what you're looking for, you walk past it without a second thought. Mammalian predators, cats, foxes, weasels, operate the same way. The kill happens, the prey is carried elsewhere, and the site of death is left clean, no body, no indication. Just an absence where a bird used to be. When you layer all 3 of these processes together, dying birds retreating into concealment, exposed carcasses being removed within minutes to hours by scavengers, and predation events that leave no recoverable remains in visible locations, the probability that you will encounter a dead bird collapses. You would need to be in precisely the right place at precisely the right moment, in a location you actually examine closely. That combination is genuinely rare, which means your lifelong impression that dead birds are almost never seen. It's not a trick of memory, it's accurate. You really don't see them, not because they aren't dying, but because every ecological process that follows death is optimized over millions of years to erase the evidence fast. Main body part 4, do birds understand death? Now we get to the part of this question that researchers have been the most reluctant to answer directly. Do birds know what death is? For most of ornithology's history, the working assumption was no. Birds, the thinking went, lack the cognitive architecture required to grasp mortality as a concept. Death, in this framework, was something that happened to birds, not something they could perceive, process, or respond to in any meaningful way. That assumption has gotten significantly harder to defend over the last 15 years. The species at the center of this shift are the corvids, crows, ravens, jays, and magpies, a family of birds that has consistently challenged the boundaries of what we consider possible in avian cognition. In 2015, researchers at the University of Washington documented something that, once you read about it, is difficult to stop thinking about. When crows encountered a dead crow, they didn't simply avoid it or ignore it. They gathered. Birds from surrounding areas would arrive at the location of a dead crow, sometimes dozens of individuals, and engage in what the researchers termed mobbing behavior. They called loudly. They circled. They landed near the body and lingered, sometimes for 15 to 20 minutes or more. And this wasn't a one-time observation. The behavior was consistent across different crow populations, in different locations under different conditions. Critically, the crows were not mobbing a predator. There was no hawk, no cat, no threat to respond to. They were responding to the dead crow itself. What followed was even more striking. After these gathering events, the researchers tracked whether crows returned to the locations where they had encountered a dead individual. They didn't. Crows that had participated in a mobbing event avoided that area for weeks, even when it fell within their established territory, even when food was present there. The encounter with death had changed how they assessed that space. They had, in some functional sense, learned from it. This does not mean crows understand death the way a human philosopher contemplates mortality, but it does mean they recognize a dead crow as significant. They respond to it with behaviors that are specific, repeatable, and socially coordinated. And the experience of encountering death changes their subsequent behavior in measurable ways. That is not a small thing. Other corvids show variations of the same pattern. Magpies have been observed placing grass near or on the bodies of dead magpies, a behavior with no clear survival benefit, which to human observers looks disconcertingly like something between a burial and a vigil. Western scrub jays, according to research from UC Davis, will halt food-catching activity and intensify alarm calls when a dead jay is present nearby. Behaviors consistent with heightened social alertness around death. Researchers are careful, very careful, about the language they use here. Words like funeral, mourning, or grief carry enormous human cultural and emotional freight, and applying them to bird behavior risks projecting meaning that may not be there. But what is there? What the data shows clearly is that these birds are not indifferent to the deaths of their own kind. They respond. The response is consistent, and it is socially complex in ways that were not supposed to be possible. For smaller songbirds, the evidence is thinner. There are accounts, anecdotal, not peer-reviewed, of cardinals or robins remaining close to a dead mate for hours, calling repeatedly, returning to the site. But anecdote is not data, and those behaviors could reflect territorial instinct, disorientation, or simple pair bond behavior that hasn't yet recalibrated to the new reality. What's clear is that small songbirds don't appear to engage in the kind of coordinated group-level response to death that corvids do. Whether that gap reflects a difference in raw cognitive capacity, a difference in social structure, or simply a difference in how much energy a small bird can afford to spend on anything that isn't immediate survival, that question remains genuinely open. So here's what we actually know. The absence of dead birds in your daily life is not a coincidence, and it is not a mystery without an answer. It is a result of interlocking systems, evolutionary, behavioral, ecological, each one doing its part to ensure that death leaves as little trace as possible. Dying birds follow instinct into the densest cover they can find, and they die where you cannot see them. Whatever bodies do end up in the open are removed by insects, by cats, by raccoons and crows and foxes, in a window so narrow you'd have to be watching at exactly the right moment to catch it. And a significant portion of bird deaths never produce a body in a visible location at all, consumed by predators who carry the evidence elsewhere and leave nothing behind. The bodies go into the undergrowth, into the food chain, into pellets under distant trees, into the soil through decomposition, the same way every living thing eventually returns to the world it came from. They disappear not because of anything strange, but because of ecology working exactly as it was shaped to work. And yet, for some of these birds, particularly the corvids, there may be something happening that sits just outside the boundary of what we've traditionally been willing to say about animals. A recognition, a response, behavior that says, this matters, this death happened, and I am going to remember where. The next time you're outside and notice, really notice, that you never see dead birds, you'll know why. They're there. They've always been there. You're just not looking in the right places at the right times. And the systems that erase them are older, faster, and more efficient than your ability to notice. If you've ever found a dead bird, tell me about it in the comments. Where were you? What species was it? How long do you think it had been there? I read every comment, and I'd genuinely like to know. See you in the next one.